What's up guys, welcome back to another video. Today is going to be a bit of a different one for me. I don't think there'll be too much in the way of actual riding in this one, but you may have seen off the end of my last live stream in NA for High Point. I wasn't a very happy man by any means, and I've done my fair amount of raging at the end of streams and rage typing in discords, etc, trying to get my point across. But I feel like text doesn't really do things justice a lot of the time. So I'm going to do my very best in this video to try and give constructive criticism slash feedback rather than just dookie all over the track like I have been doing, in the hopes that some of it can be taken on board and improved upon slightly. Now, I know I'm just one person. Unfortunately, my opinion does hold a bit of weight just because I press record on YouTube videos and a few people watch them. So I'm going to try and be as concise as possible and hopefully give some examples and just compare. A lot of time it's going to be comparing between JV tracks, I think, because I think at this point in time his tracks are of the highest standard for the game, and they are also, at least for the GP series, the exact same price as the aerial tracks are. So I feel like that's a fair comparison to make. So we're going to go through a few TFC tracks, or a few of the aerial tracks, whether it's round 1, 2, 3 or 4, and just pick up on some things that I think can be improved upon moving forwards. And so going through these tracks as well, oddly enough, I think that Parlour round 1 is genuinely the best track of the 4 that we've had so far, which is really weird to say. The only like major issue that we had with this track was the massive uphill in the back section behind this little area over here on the left. But that's to do with the game and the OEM bikes. I don't even think that's a track issue. So Parlour itself I'm going to skip right past, because honestly I have no major concerns with Parlour. I think there was a couple of variable lines on around the track. It wasn't just like super one-lined anywhere. And then we move over to Hangtown. I'm going to load this up and show you what kind of does and doesn't work on here. Right, so on Hangtown, I think one of the biggest issues that we had was rough and also ruts as well, to be honest. Now, this downhill right here, it's meant to be a rough downhill. I know it is. It's a very high speed slash heavy braking zone, so I understand the amount of rough. What I want to go through is the type of rough that we've got. More specifically, these like last 4 bumps or so here. Unfortunately, with how this game works at the moment, you can't have like super deep slash steep close together bumps. The bikes just don't handle it very well. The bike ends up skipping across the top of them. So if I was coming like this direction and trying to get turned for the corner, my bike could want to just kind of keep going straight this way and over the berm, because the front end just kind of skips its way across all of the bumps. If I go and compare this to a JV track, for example, you'll see that this is also quite a heavy braking area, and the bumps are, they do a good job of slowing you down. You can't hit them pinned by any means. However, they are a little bit more spread out and a tiny bit more rolled off, which gives the bike a bit more time to actually absorb the bumps. So I do think that the way the rough is built on the current TFC tracks needs to be revisited a little bit to make them not so harsh or so severe. There is also a couple of sections on round 4 that also do this as well, which I'll show you at a later date. But going back to this one little section, this corner ended up being very, very one-lined. Like everyone would come bombing down the hill, try and survive these bumps, which actually got better with Erode because the Erode smoothed them out a bit. But then getting into this outside here, the Erode on it got so awful, and I feel like this is a common theme for a lot of the tracks we've had so far, is I think from a very, very like basic bare bones point of view, I think the soil and the layers and the Erode needs looking into, because for whatever setup they've got going on at the moment, the ruts do not erode well. There's no chance in hell you're coming bombing down this hill, getting stopped in time for this inside, and making the inside work when you can just come down it a lot faster and hit the outside. And I think actual line choice and having multiple viable lines is a massive thing that we're lacking at the moment. But that's just one like corner, one example that I wanted to show off. Another issue that I found on some of the tracks is there being some quite ridiculous lines that are doable. So back on Hangtown, for example, we could double around this corner here, and then there is also another double after the uphill rollers. You go down the hill and you can double from that inside roller down to that landing also. And it's odd because the second the track released, I lap 1 on the track, I could tell that those lines were doable. So I don't understand how it's not been tested enough or practiced enough in the whole track building process to know that they're also doable, because they in my mind they shouldn't be possible. uh, I know that there's quite a bit of rough been added to this downhill here to try and stop it from happening, even if you need to add an invisible barrier in the air like about here where no one really should be jumping if you weren't to send it. I don't mind there being invisible barriers to stop ridiculous lines, because people were going for this in the race and then absolutely destroying others. That's just an IQ issue with people not having much race sense. Thankfully in NA they banned it from being done, but that wasn't the case in EU. So just in the testing process of building tracks, just trying to go for some weird and wonderful lines just to see if they're doable. Like I said, I on that one of the track myself and a bunch of other people like this is 100% doable. Same with this double here. I think in regards to the choppy bumps that have been put on the face of this, I think it was to stop doubling around the corner, but it just didn't work. This was a line that you could do every single lap of the race, so something needs to be revisited to change that. Whether it's like maybe make this a little bit of a shallower takeoff so you can't get as much pop to get up and over it, whether that's making this inside roller a little bit steeper again so you can't get up and over it quite as easily, and then to kind of counteract that from making the outside really OP because you've got a massive roller, just add a little bit more rough here in the outside and maybe make the outside rut slash berm itself not so steep. And again, that all just comes down to trying to balance multiple lines and make multiple lines viable. I will give props where they're due though, on the old Hangtown, is I found that both the outside in this corner and the inside here were both good lines. I found myself switching between the two throughout the race, depending on how the road was forming. A lot of other parts were fairly one line. This corner here was good. The inside and the outside were both used as well. Same with up here on the hill, is like outside and inside were both good. What I will say, the way that this rut is built here is so much better than what we had at round 4, for example. Like there's a much more like gradual slope rather than it being super vertical, and this really helps when the erode kicks in as well. If we move on to Thunder Valley, everyone knows my thoughts on Thunder Valley already. I've done a video on it explaining how one-lined the track was. But before we get into the actual line selection and possibly how to make them better, I've noticed that on Thunder Valley and also on High Point, we've started getting some random rough up the start straight, which is a bit odd to me because I don't see that in real life. You know, they're always going about like grooming slash grading the start straights, and I feel like for starts in this game, I feel like it should be an equal playing field, and then just whoever gets the best start gets the best start. But I think adding some rough in there into the mix is doing people a bit dirty, if I'm being completely honest. Like, if you manage to get a gate that's about here, you miss all of that rough, and you get a straighter shot into turn 1. Yet if you get a bad gate and you're out here, not only do you have a longer distance to go into the first corner, you also have to deal with all this like rough stuff as well. So you really are being done very dirty here. I would like to see maybe this outside being a little bit more built up than it was, to maybe make it viable compared to everyone just flat tracking on the inside here. No problem with there being no ruts or anything in this first corner, because I think turn 1s should be flat to avoid as much carnage as possible. Coming down the hill here, this rough was actually okay. It looks a little bit choppy, but you see it's a bit further spread apart than it has been on Hangtown and also on High Point. So this rough actually worked pretty damn good. And there was 2 lines in this corner, to be honest. People were either taking the second rut here, or they were taking the far outside when the second rut got too deep. And I think looking at these ruts just from a above the track perspective, you can see why they were being taken. Like the third rut here, not usable. You know, the angle of it just suddenly disappears halfway round and kind of faces you off the track. So if you try turning down further, you'll get some weird front end issues. The second rut is perfect, really smooth, 180 degrees, exits you where you want to go. And then the inside, I think, is just a little bit too shallow. There's not much there to it. And then the outside is kind of like a fail-safe. What I like about this outside, again, to give some props, is there's just that little bit of rough going around it. Nothing too silly to make it a lot slower than the inside, but just enough to make it more viable. And then, unfortunately, that's kind of where the props end on this track. The rest of it is very, very one-lined. This hill was hella sketchy. I think it was a bit better for the 250 riders than the 450 riders. The 450 bikes did struggle up this sometimes. You get all sorts of wonky little physics. Again, I think it might just be due to the nature of how sharp some of these bumps are and how severe they are. I'm not opposed to rough. I just want them to be built in a manner that works a bit better with the game. This hill, it weren't too bad. I myself, I was jumping to the outside here and banking off the outside. Some people were kind of hugging middle, and then it all filtered down this hill. Was getting a lot of like low line action, kind of hugging the far right hand side here where the bumps don't quite reach to. So one thing that could work, which I've seen on the track Sipu 2016, that's really, really cool, which I wish more track creators would implement, is off the track having some little rough bits to stop people low lining or cutting the track at all. And I'd love to see that implemented on some of these tracks. There's definitely more than one occasion on tracks where I find myself like running through the markers because you don't get penalised for it and it's just the fastest way around. In this corner, the middle rut was really, really OP. Compared to the others, and when it got so destroyed at the end of Moto 2 that you couldn't ride it anymore because again the road just gets god awful and turns into walls of death, that's when people finally started going to the outside. But I don't think it should get to a point where a rut gets physically unusable because the game can't handle it. I think it should be a case of there is multiple viable fast lines from the beginning, so then all of the ruts erode at the same rate because there's multiple people taking multiple different lines. This uphill here, I like to compare this corner to this exact same track on Sim. So in this corner, we have an inside line, which is basically the only usable line. We've got a mini whoop section going to a very, very small outside rut, which is just never going to get used. The middle isn't too terrible compared to the inside. It's just, it's a bit further out of the way. So there's really no point in going out there unless you really mess up the uphill and get off balance. So that was really one line there. And then stepping down this hill, no issues with this. Everyone just filtered to the inside again. And then this double, I felt like this double was a bit of a weird one in terms of jump shape. I found myself a lot of the time just accidentally landing flat all the way over here. And I'm pretty sure that's a skill issue on my behalf, but it just felt a bit unnatural. It felt like a lot smaller than it should have done. And then the rest of the track, it's much for a muchness. It's tend to be inside, inside, inside again, inside again. Coming down this long sweep hill over here, again, there was no penalty if you wanted to scumbag it and just hug this left-hand side, like right on where the markers are, and avoid all the rough. I have seen some hot lap videos of people just missing it out completely. So maybe some SpongeBob dotted down here, again, maybe some off-track rough to stop you from cheating. And then this rough got better again as the race went on when the erode sorted it out. But I do feel like it's just a little bit too on the sharp side, especially when it's just on the face of this roller here. I'm fine for it coming down the hill. But honestly, I feel like this last bump shouldn't be here. It should stop a little bit before it, just to let the bike settle and stop you getting any super weird bounces jumping into this inside. And I think for as far as Thunder Valley goes, that kind of covers my pain points. Other than this one last corner, I noticed on the track pack that TFC released before the aerial series started, there's a lot of corners where you don't even have to take a rut. You can just apex the corner and it'd be faster. That was exactly the same on this corner right here. I think it's the angle that the rut is at. Because you're coming up here so fast, trying to get onto this inside, where it hooks to the right really sharply, essentially you're trying to turn in like a right angle. I feel like it would make more sense if it can start in the same place, but then it kind of finishes out here, like drifts out wider. So what you found people doing is they would start in the middle here, and then they would just flat track it on this part of the track here, apex it, and then drift out wide to carry as much speed as possible. So just something else to bear in mind there, that maybe the shape of the ruts sometimes don't always work as intended. Right, now the track that made me rage quit. So we're going to go through a few parts of this that I'm just not too sure about and see how they go. And I think a lot of this is going to be hard to explain because a lot of it is revolved around the erode and how the ruts develop based on how the soil layers have been set up. This corner here, I'll show some screenshots actually because people took a few pictures after the racing. This corner was like okay at the beginning, got absolutely destroyed at the end. So you'd end up flat tracking across just to avoid it. I don't know. I could be wrong on this. I don't think there's a little step up out of the corner in real life here. It's a little bit weird that it makes you kind of jump out. That caused some weird funky physics going back across the start straight. This corner was super one-lined for the most part. This middle rut, I mean, again, if you're looking at it from a top-down view, the rut is so much smoother than all the others. And the fact that it's basically bigger than the outside ones, there's no reason to go at like further, like in the third or fourth rut in this corner at all. The second one is the best one because it's fairly wide open and it's very, very tall. And it was only like late into the second moto where I found myself going on the inside here because it was like a risk versus reward factor on if you wanted to try and work your way through the trenches or have a little bit of a safer option. Same up here, this middle right is absolutely huge and was by far the fastest. No issue with the rollers, you know, you could roll and then double, or you could double in and then go the rest of the way through. They were absolutely fine, no issue with that at all. And then coming down this hill, I don't think I saw anyone actually taking the inside here at all. I think that might be just due to how much rough there is. I think it makes sense to have a little bit more rough on the outside here than so much on the inside. But I think that's all down to a testing basis. Is in your head, obviously, it makes sense to have more rough inside, less outside, because they want to slow you down to take less track. But in practice, when you're testing, that should be recognised that that's not the case, and that these lines here are far superior than the inside is. And again, this second rut was super OP. Again, for some reason, just because of how it's built, it ends up being a lot faster than the third or the fourth rut. So these became basically unneeded. Same with the inside as well. Super one-lined in this corner. And then I did have some grief with this single right here. You can see you're down into like a G out spot, I suppose. When you land this little tabletop, your suspension's already kind of compressed here. Then when you hit a super sharp bump like this one, it causes a lot of weird funky physics. And where there's one, two, I suppose this is the actual takeoff, but we've got two little bumps here. The bike doesn't have a chance to react to it. They could all be down to suspension, to be fair, but I'm pretty happy with the suspension on my bike and how it works overall. And it just caused some really weird, funky crashes that I felt like I was a passenger sometimes and how the bike would react. Coming down this hill, nobody ever took the inside because it was just a bit too tight of an angle. Second rut over was the main one. And I think it's purely on a basis of this second rut is a copy and paste of the third rut and the fourth rut. So if it's exactly the same, you're just going to take the shorter distance. And if anything, this second rut is actually built like better to go faster in than the outside two. I mean, this outside is it's like a suggestion more than anything. It's not really viable unless this gets way too deep. Coming up the hill here, I have no issues. This little jump was quite good. It divided people if they wanted to triple to the inside or double to the middle or outside, and I think this is probably the best corner on the track in terms of line availability. All three lines on here tend to come out about the same because you could either cover less track on the inside or slingshot around the outside and have more momentum for this quad. One or two issues that I had, well, one issue that I had on one or two of the jumps on this track is the jump shape itself. I feel like this quad, I call it a quad, you know, it's got like 1, 2 and then a tabletop as a landing. Felt very, very mellow in game. I feel like it sends you a lot higher on every other iteration of the track that I've played, like regardless on which game it's on. Same with the uphill triple over there as well before the finish line. Very mellow, didn't send you high at all, and I found myself stretching it out even on a 450, so I have no idea how the 250 guys were coping with it, if they had many problems at all. In comparison to, if I go over here, we've got some singles with like super sharp, like steep jump faces, and I feel like there was a lack of consistency on the jump faces around the track on jumps I would expect to send you far versus jumps that I wouldn't do. Same with this single here as well. Like this single sent me to the absolute moon. And I did also find that the jump itself is like facing off the track. I would like it to be rotated just a little bit more to guide you in the right direction. Coming round to, I don't mind this corner. That corner was fine. Also this jump around the turn here was nice. There was a little bit of differentiation in lines, which I will say, round 4 compared to round 3, for example, there were corners that had multiple lines. It wasn't one line only everywhere. I would just like to see that improved upon a little bit further, just in regards to the rough going in and out of the corners to open up some of the lines more. Coming up to here, again, some of these bumps were a little bit too steep or too sharp, especially having them in a landing zone here. Again, I can see why they've been put here, to slow you down a little bit for the inside, to try and make the outside more viable. But I did leave a comment on this in the Discord, in this outside is so far outside, and there's nothing smooth about the rut either, that you end up covering like an extra 50 foot of track. And when this inside rut is so massive and holds you in so well, Like, this is huge. Like, this is... I think I've ridden over this line twice, so the road's not done that much. But this compared to this, like, the inside's going to be far superior every day of the week. And this, I saw these few bumps here gave some people some grief as well. Coming straight out of a deeply eroded corner was always going to cause some issues. And I think it's in a bit of a weird place. Like, I don't think people are hard on the brakes or hard on the throttle in this part of the track. You know, they've got their acceleration done around this point, so then it's just a constant flow of power through here. Again, this is quite a sharp single, which sometimes gave my front end some issues. And one thing that I wouldn't be opposed to is if you want to slow people down a bit more, maybe just add some ruts on the face of these rollers to slow people, make people filter into a line a little bit better, and just experiment with those sorts of things. Jumping up this hill, this was a little bit one-lined here. The only time I saw people going into the middle here was if they accidentally overshot the step up, and maybe if they landed about here, it's a bit difficult trying to cut in. Down to this corner, I can see what they was going for in regards to having a bunch of different ruts and having them cross over each other. Unfortunately, the inside two were the only two that really worked. Again, I think it's just due to how big they are. Like, this inside rut is the same size, if not bigger, than the outside, and it's smoother. So if you have a bigger rut and a smoother rut, it's just going to be superior all the time. No issues with this single and step up. This corner did have two lines. You could go inside or in the middle. Both were quite viable. And then coming down this hill, the inside was super OP. Again, like, you can compare the sizes of the ruts, like inside compared to middle and outside. And then I mentioned earlier where this step up is a little bit too mellow. I was finding myself stretching it out a lot. And like, looking at this corner, nothing was ever going to get used other than the inside. Again, there's no rough going into the inside. It's a super big rut. This one here is just like a token gesture. And people did ask for more ruts, but I think that's been misinterpreted as quantity over quality and viability. I think you could get rid of two of the ruts in this corner. You could leave it as an outside, a middle, and an inside, and just spend more time focusing on trying to make them more equal and even to each other. Again, I'm going to quickly show a JV track on screen at the moment. Is a lot of the time on JV's tracks, he doesn't go above 3 ruts in the corner because you don't need to. And a lot of the time, there's only 2 lines into a corner. And I would much rather have 2 quality lines and them be equal than 5 lines where one is really, really overpowered. And I feel like that just makes the most sense. This next bit is kind of nitpicking a little bit, but I would like to preface that these tracks and the GP tracks are the exact same price on the MX Bike shop, so I feel like it's only fair as a consumer to criticise based on price. In terms of visuals, I feel like the outdoors, the AMA tracks are really, really lacking in comparison to the GP tracks. Now, I'm well aware that JV does that sort of thing as a day job, so he has a massive advantage. But then it begs the question in, should we be paying more for the GP tracks because the quality is much higher, and we get a qualifying and a race version of the same track in a high and low quality? So we essentially get 4 tracks rather than 1, and they're higher quality overall. Or do we just pay less for TFC tracks? That's a question that I'd like to throw out there. I'm not too sure on that. If there's anything that can be done to increase the visual appearance of these tracks, then I'd love it. I will give props that round 4 I had 0 FPS issues, and I think that's because there's no random vehicles out in the abyss off the map that just aren't needed. A few trees off out in the distance that I can see here, but the trees do very, very minimal to impact the FPS. I noticed that on tracks like Parla, for example, there was so many just vehicles off in the distance that weren't needed that really do affect the FPS quite a lot. And I think overall that'll kind of do it from me. I'm hoping that this hasn't come across in like a super negative way anywhere. Just from, I feel so cringy saying this, just from like a top level rider's point of view, as someone who really relies on the game's success quite a lot and is quite passionate about it, which is why I get so angry sometimes. And there's a lot of top level people that have quit just in the space of a month because of the way the tracks are being built. And I don't want to fall into that same category. I mean, I rage quit the NA race because I just wasn't enjoying it. It wasn't fun at all. And I'm hoping that this will be treated as feedback and criticism rather than me just having a moan. I really hope it does, because I can hand on heart say at the moment out of all of the 4 opening rounds, there's not one round that has been better than last year's 4 rounds, which kind of sucks. Now, you want to see improvement year on year. I'm hoping by the end of the season we'll have something that everyone's happy with. I'm just hoping that there's still a community left at that point, because everyone seems to just be getting fed up by now. And I think it's a combination of game physics as well as current OEMs, as well as tracks not catering to those physics very well, which is something that I really praise JV on. He's found something that works, and something that works well for the bikes, which makes the racing just all that more enjoyable, just having multiple variable lines, no wonky physics, and it's really good fun. So hopefully this gets taken into account. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I would love to get your thoughts and opinions down below in as constructive as of a manner as possible. Hopefully no just like whining for the sake of it, like I've been doing as well. And yeah, hopefully this is well received. If you enjoyed, please do drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new. I'd greatly appreciate it. Have a lovely rest of the day, whatever you're up to, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.